Welcome to the second part of our Autovista Group Insight video looking at autonomous vehicle technology. I'm joined once again by Autovista Group's Chief Economist Christof Engelskirchen and Daily Brief journalist Tom Geggus. Thank you both for joining me again.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, indeed. Thank you very much.
Now, if we looked at the current technology on the market today and where autonomous technology may go, today we're going to be talking about the best use cases for driverless vehicles and technology, as well as discussing what infrastructure may be needed to implement the technology going forwards. Now, there are some benefits I'm sure many end users would like the idea of kicking back, relaxing, especially while on a long journey. But are motorways best suited for autonomous technology, or are we really talking about its use in cities and deliveries, for example?
You do need space, to develop and test and put autonomous driving into reality. And I could imagine that highways are the perfect environment to test autonomy on long distance travel, and it's happening at the moment. And potentially, maybe, Tom, I don't know what you think, but maybe in some, let's say, less densely populated urban areas.
Yeah, absolutely. The minute you have an area that has more variables in it, more vehicles, more pedestrians, cyclists, etc., that means a lot more processing and a lot more work for a computer, for a computer system like the one that would power an autonomous vehicle. So definitely, I would say highways, there's a more constant flow of traffic. Things are slightly more predictable than, for example, compared to an urban area.
We're going to get to a point at some point in the future where autonomous cars are sharing the road with non-autonomous cars, with standard cars.
Yeah.
And whereas autonomous cars might be able to compute things differently, might be able to have improved reaction time over drivers, for example, there's going to possibly be some conflicts there, especially on sort of long distance journeys on motorways at high speeds. So do we get to a point in the future where we're talking about segregated lanes for autonomous technology and autonomous driven vehicles, at least up until a point where the majority of the market is autonomous?
I think if we're talking about mixed traffic, we could imagine situations where people movers or commercial vehicles on some campuses or airports operate in mixed traffic situations without, let's say, lane separation. Yeah, because it's a contained environment. I mean, that's what I found as the most probable use cases. People would be properly trained. There would be regular trainings associated to engaging, as a driver of a traditional car with a autonomous one that doesn't have a driver. But in the real world, on the open road, I cannot imagine that driverless cars will be mixed with traditional vehicles anytime soon. Yeah, so we would need separated lanes, and on those separated lanes, that autonomy can be very well monitored and controlled, and this will be the reality for autonomy in the sense that there is no driver involved.
I mean, you do currently see some autonomous vehicles, testing vehicles, let's be honest, sharing the roads, I think, in San Francisco with some of the tech startups over there. But of course, as I said, that's all on a testing basis. That's not real-world application. So certainly when it comes to integrating self-driving vehicles, it's going to take a lot of work, because if you think about it, if a road is full of, say, 90% person-controlled vehicles versus 10% self-driving vehicles, those vehicles have to do a lot more calculating to work out what the, shall we say, less predictable human drivers might be doing. If all of the vehicles were self-driving, hypothetically speaking, and they were all connected, the amount of processing there, we can assume, would be less, because there aren't as many variables that are unpredictable or as unpredictable as humans can be. And of course, they were talking about just basic human error. So has a person fallen asleep? Have they lost concentration? Are they bored?
I mean, I can also I agree, Tom. So we have let's say closed off campuses, airports, where we could have certain, let's say, non-high density neighborhoods with large streets where we could have mixed traffic situations, and maybe there is a a regulation issued by the city that only drivers can enter this area with their car if they have a special training completed. I could imagine a situation like this, but then again we're talking about a very limited use case. If you want to talk about a car driving through Paris, through London, through Frankfurt in a mixed traffic situation, since the autonomous car would be programmed to be less assertive than the typical Londoner, Parisian, French, German driver in a high density traffic, the car would basically come to a standstill, and the human driver would take advantage of this.
I think one of the most kind of real-world current applications that we're seeing, or that we had the potential to see quite recently, was HGVs, actually, platooning, which was when you have two or more trucks linked in a convoy, connected via technology and automated driving support systems. So the vehicles would automatically maintain a set close distance between each other for parts of their journey. So the truck at the head of platoon acts as the car leader or the vehicle leader, with the others behind it reacting, adapting and changing to its movements as it goes along. And this requires little to no action from the drivers. So of course they would remain in control at all times, so they can just decide to leave the platoon and drive independently to the next location if they need to. So certainly there you're seeing the potential for kind of a mixed approach. But of course on motorways, traditionally speaking, you would see vehicles move over to the side with the slower vehicles. So there could be room there to create their own lanes system for them. But again, if there's a human element involved around those vehicles, you're going to have to plan for that.
Exactly. We just touched on two sort of examples there, cities and obviously motorways, highways. A lot of people will imagine that they can kick back, they can relax, they can, take it easy on a very long journey. But where actually is autonomous technology best suited? Is it on the highway? Is it in the city? Is it a mix of both?
Well, of course, as I mentioned, vehicle platooning has its potentials for motorways, where vehicles are more predictable and how they drive more predictable than, say, a city centre in comparison. And then, of course, you have the other end of the spectrum, which is urban driving. And the current state of the world at the minute, we're all kind of spending more time indoors. We're shopping online as opposed to going out into the high street, and that means there's more to-the-door deliveries and certainly more last-mile deliveries. And I think we could really see growth in autonomous vehicles there. So you did see, amidst real lockdowns, a real kind of flourishing of vehicles that could in effect drive themselves. So in San Francisco, for example, you saw self-driving car company Cruise help make contactless food deliveries to vulnerable communities, and in the UK you saw autonomous drop-offs as miniaturised delivery vehicles from Starship Technologies transported food across the town of Milton Keynes. So when we're really scaling things down as opposed to the giant HGVs, there's potential for really cutting back on human interaction and the need for human drivers.
I think there's a lot of room, if I may add here, for testing technology in all kinds of different setups. And we will see more and more of these test cases, and that that does make sense. And this is where the technology can prove itself, because that's important to develop autonomous driving. If we're talking commercially about a viable use case, what I have come to conclude is that the driver needs to be taken out of the equation. So platooning on campuses, on enclosed spaces for long distance logistics, it's all working and would all be fine. But if it's commercially viable, you would have to be able to do this without a driver in these cars. Yeah. And while this is, I think this is possible from a technology perspective, again, I'll come back to the physically separated lane discussion, because if you add things up in the end, you will come to the conclusion that you need some sort of separation to just make that system easier to monitor. Yeah, it's easier to equip a separated lane with all the technology and all the redundant technology that you need. So physically separated lanes would be, for me, a prerequisite. And I don't think we will see it in passenger cars other than, of course, improved driver assistance systems, but I don't think we will see in privately owned passenger cars, we will not see autonomous cars driving level 3, 4, or 5 in the very near future.
Now, because we talk about the vehicles themselves, as we've seen across the automotive industry, especially when it comes to things like new alternative technology and powertrains, the car is one thing, but the infrastructure is absolutely vital in order to get the sales and the technology out on the road. For example, electric vehicle charging, hydrogen fueling stations. So how vital and what type of infrastructure needs to be considered when we're coming to autonomous vehicles?
There is a lot of technology involved, but as long as you keep it to a certain area or a certain route, I think it's a lot easier to manage. So nobody, is talking about installing this everywhere. But for certain areas, I think it's absolutely manageable. There's one question of, and this is a question of redundancy. So how redundant do the systems need to be set up, and what performance standards you want as a society that the system meets, because that needs to be defined first. Yeah, and then obviously there comes a price tag on all of these topics. But I guess if we start with the question, how safe does a system need to be, and that I think can be defined, and other industries have defined this before this industry or our industry. The technology that you need, the redundancy that you need, and the safety nets, they are an outcome of that discussion. So I don't think that technology is the issue here. It's more what performance standards we want to meet with that.
And that's all we have time for. I would like to thank Christof and Tom for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
And don't forget to visit the Autovista Group Daily Brief YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and stay up to date with our latest videos looking at a range of different topics covering the automotive industry. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the Autovista Group Daily Brief. Details are now on screen. But for now, until next time, thanks very much for watching.